All right, Chief. What got you involved in the whole mental health therapist space? Why did you want to work in that? It's a huge minefield, right? And it's difficult at the best of times.
Yeah. So I actually always wanted to be a lawyer. So this question is always interesting, when people ask, because obviously it's a really common question. But I actually switched my degree like last minute before I went to grad school into mental health. And my rationale at that time was I really just like this idea of understanding people.
Mm.
Which is interesting because obviously there's a lot more to being a therapist than just understanding. Um, so yeah, I feel like therapy kind of fell into my lap in a way, and even the type of therapy I do kind of fell into my lap just because I the type of therapy I do is it's not very traditional. And so I'm very thankful that I found this type of therapy just because I think traditional therapy does not mesh well with, like my personality. So I
Talk to me
kind
about it.
of
Talk to me about the non-traditional stuff.
Yeah, so I think when people think of therapy, they think that they're going to go to their therapist and sit and talk for 45 or 60 minutes, which a lot of therapy is that way. But I'm very behavioral in my approach. So I'm a firm believer you can only talk about things for so long before it just kind of becomes redundant and you're going in a circle. Actually like really passionate about it just because I specialize in anxiety disorders. And so um I see people all the time that come to therapy with me for the first time, and their symptoms have actually gotten worse from talk therapy, just because talk therapy, the research shows, does actually exacerbate anxiety symptoms, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like when you go to a talk therapist, they're going to ask you, why do you think you're anxious? Or why do you think you became that way? And that just sends both of you down this like rabbit hole of ruminating and trying to figure things out, which honestly, like at the end of the day, it's not really, with all respect, it's not that important for us to understand how we became the way we became because it's not going to change that. Um, and so I'm more so of let's understand generally how you became the way you are, and then let's do something about it. So my sessions are about exposing people to the things that they're scared of versus talking about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Don't talk about change. Do the change, right?
Yes. Yeah. Because, we wait way too often to do things because we're waiting for our feelings to change. Think of like working out, for example, such a clear example. Like so many people aren't they aren't able to develop that habit because they're waiting to feel motivated. But the feeling of motivation, for example, comes after you complete a task. It doesn't come before. So it's the same thing with anxiety. A lot of times we're waiting to feel less anxious to stop ruminating, for
Mm.
example. But the reason that you feel anxious is because you're ruminating. And so I think even traditional therapy, we teach people things that are not helpful, right? We teach them, change the way you think. It's like, well, if we could just change the way we think, that would have, abolished the issue. But we have negative thoughts as humans for a reason. They're there to protect us. And so it's not about changing the way that you think or feel, it's about changing the way you respond to those things. And I think
Mm.
that's the sweet spot.
How do you break that mindset though? How do you stop someone from digging their own hole, really, right? Like
Mhm.
they see something, they want to understand it, then they talk about it, they go to therapy, they probably talk to all their mates about it too. I've met
Mhm.
a ton of folks that it's just, okay, cool, we've got that answer now. Now we're gonna have to do something. How do you get
Yeah.
someone to do something?
It's just modeling in session. Like I can't tell you how many times I redirect someone in session. Say they come to session and they want to talk about why they think they feel anxious. And I'll let them talk for a little bit,
Yeah.
and then I'll, politely interject and I'll say, um, I'm not sure that that's helpful. And are you okay if we actually do something that maybe you've been avoiding doing because you've been ruminating about this? And so we'll stop and we'll then go in that moment, teach them how to redirect their attention because there's a huge difference between thought and thinking. And we're absolutely right when we say we can't control our thoughts. So our thoughts are those things that pop into our head. What if that person's staring at me weird? Or, what if I get a bad grade on my test? We can't control those thoughts because that's what the mind does is it creates creative thoughts.
Mm.
But what we can work on redirecting is everything that comes after that initial thought. So that's the conjuring up of information and the attempt to try to prevent or plan for something, like preventing something bad from happening or planning. Um, that's what we can control. And so the more a therapist does that in session with a client, the more they start to do that on their own. And, I think part of it too is getting loved ones and family members involved too, to let them know about accommodations, right? Like, eh, let's talk about reassurance, right? If I ask you every time I come to session, I'm like, hey, Alex, do you think that my friend is mad at me? And each time you're like, no, I'm sure they're not mad at you. Like, I'm sure it's fine. I'm going to keep coming back and asking you that question, because in that moment, it makes me feel better that you reassured me. But then long term, if you actually look at the research, it makes someone feel much less sure. So as a therapist in that moment, if someone asks me that, I might say, I don't know, they might not. Which a lot of people would be like, well, what? You would say that to a client? And it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know if your friend's upset with you. I don't know if you're going to die 2 minutes from now. I don't know if your mom's going to get cancer. Like, we don't know any of these things. And the best way you can handle anxiety is to teach an individual to understand you can't prevent bad things from happening through a behavioral approach, though, because most people will tell you logically, yeah, I know I can't prevent bad things from happening, but behaviorally they're acting as if they can. And so that's what anxiety pays attention to, is the behaviors. And that's why people get stuck in their anxiety.
And that's what they do, right? They limit themselves. They keep themselves in this like controlled, comfortable environment. So then, nothing
Mhm.
bad can happen, which usually ends up being the creator of their own demise. It comes back and kicks them in the ass. It's
Yeah.
like, well, if I sit around and just kind of lock myself away and I was like, well, I'm comfortable. I like my room. It's like, sweet, you're now going to get lonely. Now everything else is going to start
Mhm.
coming to you. And
Yeah.
it's funny how we chop off our leg to spite the foot. Humans have an eyesight for the end of the nose, and that's it. We can't
Hmm.
really. Well, we can. We just don't like to look over yonder, right? It's like, no, no, I'm
Yeah.
gonna stare at my feet, not at the direction in which I'm walking, and it's quite funny. It's quite strange. I'll see it in a gym's perspective. They'll come in and they'll believe they're on bullshit because they've told themselves it 24/7. In their own
Yeah.
head, they're just reassuring and reasserting that bullshit in their own head. And it's like, dude, like, you don't have to do that. It's
Yeah.
it's you that's doing that. And now we have to make the change. And I fucking love you for saying that. You've got to do something. You got to show your own competence, and then your confidence ends up building because of it.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I all the time tell people, because I'll hear, I can't stop ruminating, or I can't. And it's like, with the most love and compassion, you can,
Yeah.
but you won't. And I always explain, because that can be really hard for people to hear, to grasp. But if my true dialogue is that I can't, then I won't ever, right? But if I believe I have control over how I'm choosing to respond to anxiety or triggers, then I'm going to be able to get out of it, right? And so it sounds like that's kind of like what you're doing in your workspace too. It's like this small change in word can be really helpful. And the thing you said earlier about anxiety being self-fulfilling is so accurate. Like, yeah, the example you give, like locking yourself in your room and it's quote unquote comfortable, but then yeah, you're faced with a different set of uncomfortable emotions, loneliness, sadness, right? And so I tell people all the time, I am never here to get rid of any emotion for you, because they're all important. What I am here to do is to save you the time and energy you're spending trying to prevent these emotions from happening. Um, like, I'll joke all the time with clients, they'll say, I wash my hands so much because I don't want to like worry about getting sick. Like, also, you must never worry about getting sick then. And then they'll laugh, of course, because the whole reason they're with me is because they can't they won't stop worrying about, will I get sick? Will I won't? So the very thing that anxiety lied to them about, which was wash your hands so you don't have to worry about this, didn't actually successfully, quote unquote, get rid of the anxiety. And that's because anxiety will never go away. And that's the false narrative anxiety plays out for individuals, because it will always have a goal that's unattainable, because that's what keeps them in the cycle.
Mm. People think they can cure themselves, right? It's just going to be a chapter that I can rip out of my own book and everything's going to be fine. It's sound. I can take this pill, it's going to go away, it's going to vanish. It's
Mm-hmm.
part of who you are, man. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
will follow you around, wherever you are, you are.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to have that be that shadow that's going to fucking keep on following you. Wherever you go, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
there. It's like, well, we
Mm-hmm.
can either try and run from it, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
we can end up working with it. And not a saying, but I have this thing where I think everybody needs to sit across the table from their own devil and learn the color of their eyes. You got to stare into it. You really have to face it, because if you run away,
Mm-hmm.
like you really are a puppet of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because again, you're not running away from anything. Because you run away and then there's just that other set of, emotions that are waiting on the other side. And yeah, that saying, the only way out is through is so valid. And, one of the biggest things I think that we can learn as humans is to create a different relationship with uncomfortable emotion. Um, you know, Anxiety doesn't have to be a bad thing. Like, I'll have, the behavioral exercises I bring people through are called exposures. Sometimes people will come back and they'll say, my exposures went really well this weekend. And I'm like, what made them go well? And they're like, I wasn't really anxious. It's like, what? Let's backtrack for a second, because just because you didn't feel anxious in that moment doesn't necessarily now equate it to quote unquote good. And then I think it's also a time for us to again replay that narrative of like, it's not good nor bad if we feel anxious or if we don't feel anxious. It's just a feeling.
Mm,
Now, what do you do with the feeling? That's the important part. It's just a thought. Now, what do you do with a thought? Now, anxiety is so much about like, I need to figure out what this means. And that's what a lot of therapy is. And that makes me upset. It's like, let's stop trying to figure things out. Like, there's nothing to figure out. We, of course, are all a product of our past. It does not take a rocket scientist to understand that if you've had a hard childhood, you have remnants of that. And even if you haven't had like necessarily quote unquote a hard childhood, we've all had experiences that show up in who we are today. And understanding it is like pointless in my opinion. Because the other thing that I truly believe, and this is not meant to sound pessimistic, but humans don't change. We don't change. It's our personality, right? I think you can turn the volume down on some things, but like someone who's anxious, for example, they're always going to have a layer of anxiety to them because that is their temperament. That is what they're born with. It's actually genetic, right? There's nothing bad with having a more anxious temperament. There actually is a lot of research that if you have an anxious temperament, you're actually a little bit more intelligent and you have a higher creativity level. And there's some things about being more anxious that are really frustrating. So there's pros and cons to having any sort of like personality or whatnot. So I think, this whole idea of talk therapy, especially for anxiety disorders, is like, it just makes me sad. And I think like, we don't, the general public doesn't know this. Like, I don't fault any person going to therapy who has anxiety, who goes to a talk therapist, because they don't know any better, right? But if you look again at the research, it just makes anxiety worse.
how did you arrive at this school of thought?
This school of thought.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trained in exposure response prevention, but I don't think that's where it came from, just because so after I graduated undergrad, I took kind of like a year off and I did yoga teacher training. And I
Nice.
also love working out. I don't know if you saw, but I bodybuilded for many years. I did 5Ks. I was an athlete my whole life. I still love working out. And I am a firm believer, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think discomfort is one of life's best teachers. And so a lot of teachings in yoga is about learning to like live with uncertainty and discomfort versus trying to push it away. And so I got like really into that like philosophy. I read this book years ago called Comfortable with Uncertainty.
Mm,
And, shortly after I actually got recruited by the company that I work for now. And it just lined up with so much of like what I truly believe. Like, I feel like the only reason I feel very resonated with this therapy is because I believe it. Like, I practice it. I say all the time, like, I don't have OCD. I don't necessarily have a clinical diagnosis, but I use the concepts I teach people every single day. Anytime I catch myself ruminating, I'm redirecting and saying, I don't know, let's just wait and see. Um, and so I think, I also grew up in a household where my parents were pretty hard on me. And so I think this notion of like lean into the discomfort was like very like innate in me,
mm.
which is like a beautiful thing. But this last year I actually changed. I've been changing a little bit, and my MO has been slowing down is the real flex. Um, and so, yeah, I think, yeah, there's a lot of things that got me to land on some of this.
What? Why slowing down?
Yeah, so last year, okay, so I'm gonna backtrack even a little bit more if you don't mind.
Backtrack as far as you want, mate. You take it wherever you want.
So I was always the type of person that was like, like a go-getter. Like, I was racing the boys in elementary school during recess in like heels and like winning. Like I was always like I was like such a go-getter. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think what people don't realize is also not always a good trait to have. And so after I graduated college, I did maybe like 4 years of bodybuilding. And I don't know if do you know much about bodybuilding? I'm guessing you do. Yeah. So it's like a pretty intense sport. You're tracking literally everything down to the gram or the ounce. You're working out, you're sleeping, no alcohol, like nothing. And even in off season, you're still doing all of that. So, whether you're in or off season, it's really intense. So I was doing that for like 4 years straight. And I remember my last competition, I had two lined up. So I did the first one. I like barely could smile on stage. I was just like so checked out. And I was a week out from my next competition. And I just remember I was in my hotel room and I was like crying. And I like just was like, I can't do this anymore. So I ultimately decided not to do that second competition, which if anyone who's listening who doesn't know about bodybuilding, we prep for literal months, like hardcore dieting. So a lot of times we do more than one competition back to back because you put in all that work. You don't want to just do one competition. So for me to like essentially quit like a week before the next competition kind of signals how checked out a person has to be in order to like not like push one more week. So that was kind of like my first real opening into like, hey, let's like maybe not be so hard on ourselves all the time. Maybe it doesn't always have to be that serious. And then a couple of years later, which was actually just last year, I was working out with a trainer and I actually got this condition called rhabdo. Do you know
Mm,
what this is? Yeah.
mhm,
Well, for anyone listening, because a lot of people don't know what rhabdo is, but rhabdo is a pretty serious condition that you can acquire through working out too intensely. And it's serious because you can literally die in a couple of days because your kidneys essentially go into failure because your body can't filter through the proteins that have broken down into the muscles. And so I wound up in the hospital for about a week. I had over 12 pounds of swelling in just my arms. I couldn't even like feed or bathe myself. Like the orthopedic surgeons kept coming. They thought they were gonna have to cut into my arms. I had just moved to North Carolina at this time, so it was hard because I was like alone,
mm,
and
mm.
it was just like a very hard thing physically, but also mentally because working out has always been my safe haven, and so to feel like that was taken from me was like really hard. Especially because I kind of defined my personality as someone who always pushes. And so after getting this, like even today, I still get scared to work out to the same capacity. Um, and so that was really my like wake up call of like, Medina, like you worked out so hard that you gave yourself a condition where you like could have died in a couple of days, or you could have gotten permanent disability, or you could have gotten like damage to your kidneys that was long lasting. And so that was kind of where I was like, slowing down is, I think of flex. Like, a couple months ago, I was at Run Club and I was asking the Run Club organizer, I was like, should I run or walk? And he said, you should definitely run. And I was like, what if I told you it'd actually be harder for me to walk? Because
Mm.
like mentally, it would be harder for me to like sit it out, if you will. And I think we unfortunately in society, we have this narrative, especially with like work from home. Like it is to me, like I get nauseous when I think of how many people like brag about how they were up till 2 a.m. working. And I'm not here to judge anyone if you are someone that is that way. It's just like, again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Out of anxiety, we work hard to avoid criticism. And like, I'll own it. Like, that's why I do it. My dad was really hard on me. So I'm sure part of the reason I push, 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 push is because I don't want to not be good at something. And I think anxiety is propelling that narrative versus like I logically know it's okay to not be perfect at everything, but if I don't choose to align my behaviors with that logic, I'm never going to truly feel like it's okay to be a human, right? And so that is as condensed of a story as I can make, but yeah, that's why that's kind of been my motto the last year.
And who did
Whew.
you find after slowing down?
I think, ooh, that's a good question. Slowing down. So I think the first thing that I definitely have learned is I don't know that anyone's asked me that question. That's a really good question. I don't know that I even know the answer. Um,
You don't need to know the answer. We're just going to find out.
I know. Well, I mean, I now I'm tempted. I'm like, because that is a really good question. I mean, I think like obviously on the forefront, what I've learned is like it's not that serious. That's like another thing I've taken with me. I can be like a very serious person. And again, I think it's
Mm,
gotten me a lot of to it's the reason why I'm in the position I am in now. I would say I'm like pretty successful. And sometimes it's really not that serious. So I started learning dance this last year. I always wanted to dance ever since I was young, but my family unfortunately could not afford it when I was younger. And so I'm basically living out my dream as a 31-year-old. And I will tell you, um, I went in with this idea of like, I want to be good, right? And then as the year has gone on, I'm like, I don't want to be good necessarily. Would that suck if I were good? No. Like I wouldn't mind, but the reason I do it is I want to have something where it's just like not that serious.
mm.
Like I can go and I can have fun. I can face the wrong direction, which I did the other day. A good 30 seconds I was facing the wrong direction, but I had fun with it. Like, and I just think, especially as we get older, we get that stripped from us, right? When we're kids, we don't think about doing things because we're good or bad at them. We just do them because we enjoy it. And so I think that's kind of been the biggest lesson is it's not that serious.
I think we need to seek out things we're shit at. I think we
Hmm.
we need to eat at least one slice of humble pie every single day. It keeps us a bit
Yeah.
more grounded and a bit more well-rounded as people, right? We can see different perspectives from the eyes of a dancer or somebody who reads or fucking, I don't know, anything. It's like, okay, there is multiple ways you can live this thing, rather than just being a therapist or a professional sports person or someone who coaches or whatever it is, right? Like we just sentence ourselves to our own bubble, and that's it. We just stay in it, and we live the 9 to 5, and we do the same thing Monday to Friday, and then we blink, and then it's a week next Tuesday, and we're like, oh shit, I got to do this again, and we forget that there is multiple ways of doing this thing, and I think we need to seek out those perspectives, right? And we get a little bit more balanced, and I find it quite interesting when folks usually use sport and exercise to figure themselves out because we're quite obsessive creatures, and we'll go into it, right? And then something will strip it away, whether it's an injury, whether it's an illness, whether it's a circumstance. It strips it away, right? And then what have you got? You get this identity crisis of, oh, who am I? Like, I can't work out anymore. I can't play ball anymore. I can't feed my family from being a professional anymore. Then who the fuck am I? And they usually go for this little bit of a period, right? Whether it's 2 weeks or 2 years or more, where
Hmm.
they just slump, and it's this weird character act that kind of goes down, and we've got to figure out who we are again. And when we have to try all this shit that isn't, lifting weights or being a bodybuilder or playing basketball or whatever it is, it's like, oh, okay, I've got to write, I've got to paint, I go to, you know, yoga, I go for walks, whatever it is, go camping, and you end up figuring out, oh, okay, I've got these other little facets to my personality and my character that I kind of just hid away and I didn't really know. It's
Hmm.
interesting what traits of us kind of shine through to get through whatever environment we came out of, right?
Hmm. Well, yeah, and exactly what you're saying is like you get to the real reason why you worked out to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't work out to like drill myself into the ground, right? And now on the other side of that really uncomfortable situation that I went through is this notion of like, I do really strive to take things less seriously. And it's something I teach my clients all the time because when you have anxiety, you take things quite seriously. And it's not to devalue or minimize the anxiety we feel, but it's like, it's just not that serious. And, I think it's a beautiful place to be because it's like the example of the only way out is through. Because like
Mm.
even after I left the hospital, I was like, I was having really bad nightmares about like the trainer and all these things. And I asked myself, like, what would be the most uncomfortable thing to do right now? And I said, go talk to him. And as
Oof.
bad as I didn't want to go talk to him, I knew that every day I tell people to do the thing that's uncomfortable and to approach the thing you're scared of. Um, because I think I just wanted to obviously express how it affected me. And in my head, I'm like, what would talking about it do? Like, it's not going to change the fact. And it's like, anything we do is not about changing something that we've already experienced, because obviously none of us can change what happened, but we can respond, again, we can respond to it differently. So, ironically, when I did go talk to him, my nightmares stopped immediately. And that is just like an example of, going to do the thing that is scary. And then even like when you're talking about, we maybe something stripped of us and then we have to figure out like our new identity, and it's like through, again, that behavior action of like doing something. Like I found that new identity through dancing and through choosing to slow down and go for a walk instead of a run every day. Or like maybe it doesn't have to be the 6-minute mile, maybe it can be the 10-minute mile, and that's okay too, right?
Mm.
um yeah, because I think we're also very all or nothing. And like you in the fitness industry, I'm sure you see that all the time.
Oh, it's fucking irritating. But yeah,
It's
I completely understand it because I'm the same. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
like I would rather smash myself in the face than give myself a half decent workout, get a sweat on, and I can walk out of the gym. It's like, no, I want to absolutely crush my soul. It's like, God damn, maybe maybe we can't do that all the time. But then you get folks coming in. It's like, I can't do this. I was like, why? Because I can't run the 6 minute mile, or because I can't put 100 kilos above my head, or I can't do this, I can't do that. I was like, okay, well, you can do something to your capacity, right? You can like
Mhm.
fall down, get up, add a little bit of a hop and clap your hands above your head. I'm going to say, well done, you just did a burpee. Like, that's
Mhm.
it. You can use 5 pound dumbbells. It doesn't fucking matter. Like, you're coming in, you're doing something. And I think the
Right.
biggest change and the biggest benefit people see has got naught to do with the physicality. It's got everything to do with you have literally just faced yourself. You have walked through those doors and done something that you didn't want to do. You
Mhm.
have done something, did the change, made the difference, physically acted upon it rather than, hey boss, maybe I should work out today, man. Maybe I should do 3 days a week, but I'll start tomorrow. And it's like, we're now in February, we're halfway through February, which is mental.
Mhm.
We've the January has been and gone. Folks are already like quit their membership after the January like highs and be like, I'm gonna now do this. I'm gonna quit smoking. I'm gonna work out or whatever they promise themselves. Fuck all that.
Mhm.
Don't promise yourself anything. Just get
Mhm.
out and do something. And I think
Mhm.
habits actually form quicker than we think. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I've got to do it for 29 days, 31 days, however many hours. You're like, forget all that. You don't
Right.
need a scientific study to prove something. You got to go
Yeah.
out and do it. And guess what? Like you'll be proud of yourself because you got out of bed, you walked around the block and was like, nice. Maybe tomorrow I'll walk around the block again. The next day
Mhm.
I'll do the same route. The day after that though, you might do one and a half.
Mhm.
6 months down the line, you might actually go to that gym or the yoga studio. And then you meet new friends, and then the community aspect pulls you out of your own hole. It's just those little small margins that eventually ends up
Mhm.
making something, right? Like I got a saying of every day you got to dig a hole. You're gonna go out with different implements every single day. One might be a shovel, next might be a bulldozer, and then some days you might go out with your bare hands and have to literally just dig a hole. Doesn't matter the
Mhm.
size, but you got to dig a hole,
Mhm.
and that's kind of life, and it's
Yeah.
definitely fitness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if you look at the research, that's what they say is the most successful people boil it down to those small steps. Because I tell people that all the time, like what keeps us in that black and white kind of mindset is we're thinking of everything that goes into, for
Yeah,
example, making the lifestyle change of working out. It's like, oh, I have to work out all for the rest of my life. Or like when I do exposures with people, they're like, oh, I have to do exposures for the rest of my life. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I hate to break it to you. Everyone technically wakes up and lives with uncertainty. Every time we get into the car, we live with the chance we could die. Every time we eat food, we live with the chance that we could choke, right? Like me just sitting here, I live with the chance that the ceiling could fall on me. I don't know, right? And so it's not this like unending goal. It's just literally, it sounds corny, but it's a way of living. It's the same thing with working out. It's the same thing with anything. It's not about what you're doing day to day. It's what you're doing, generally speaking, over a long span of time. Because some days or weeks you're not going to work out, and some days and weeks you're going to go balls to the wall. And like that is the definition of balance. Like I love all kinds of workouts. I do like every once in a while I'll go to F45, for example. I don't know if you know that workout.
yeah,
Um, Anyone who loves F45 and goes F45, I want to preface this with I also love F45, but I think it is insane that people go to that every day or like 5, 6 times a week out of like every week of the month. And I'm like, this is so Americanized because we do that workout, that really intense workout, and then we sit the rest of the day. And I'm like, what? Like we would all be better off if we just walked more, right? Or managed our stress more. And it's just like these things that, or even like 75 hard. I'm sorry. I'm just like, what? Like we're not gonna eat, sorry, I don't know if you're on 75 hard, but we're not gonna eat sugar for 75 days. Like, what is
Dude,
the point of that? Like,
say what
I'm
you
sorry.
want.
Like, I'm just like, it's just so Americanized. It's like, I'm going to go from never working out, drinking all this alcohol, probably eating so much sugar, I can't even count it. And now I'm going to work out twice a day. I'm going to never drink. I'm not going to have any sugar. It's just like so extreme.
Mm,
And it's like, how about we just like, and I say the same thing with anxiety. Because again, I think we have this false narrative that we can get rid of anxiety. Like, no, we can't. And I don't want you to get rid of anxiety. It's there evolutionarily to protect yourself. So like again, create a different relationship with it. And like, I don't know, just very all or nothing. Like all the time people ask me, what do you eat? What do you eat? And I'm like, honestly, after I got out of the hospital, actually, was the first time I stopped tracking my food.
brilliant.
And I can't imagine, I don't know how I was doing that, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I just try to eat as intuitively as I can. And some days, like I just got back from lunch with my friend and I had some greasy ass waffle fries and they were delicious. And tomorrow I'll have a salad or whatever, right? It's about that balance. And I think we lose that in society, I'm gonna work until 2 a.m. or I'm gonna then last minute call off for 3 days because I'm so burned out. And it's
yeah.
like, where's the balance?
Here's the thing, like, I think people really need to understand who they are and how they work, right? And you do get those mental people that like to sit on the extremes and do really well, and you're like, fucking hats off to you, mate. You go do your thing.
Yeah.
However, taking that example and applying it to the masses is never a good thing. The diet culture, there's always this, that, and the other. You got to do 75 hard, you've got to like journal and meditate for 5 hours in the morning. I was like, that might work for like 1 out of 1 million people.
But then it's gonna come back, and because I would say I don't want to say I'm 1 out of 1 million, but I would say I'm that personality. But then you see kind of what happened with that, and so I
Yeah.
think I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's
No, no,
like
please.
any of us are meant for that. I think we have like if I could go back in time and I could teach my younger self something, it would be that. It would be like it's not that serious, and like it doesn't have to be that. Um, so
Agreed.
yeah,
You need to understand how you will react to certain things. If you're the type of person that goes to extremes, for example,
yeah,
you don't need to
yeah,
go to every house party.
yes,
You don't
that
need you
right
don't
there,
need to know. You rolled that dice. You know what comes up. You know what I mean? You've played that game. You don't
yeah.
need to fucking know what happens because 3 days later you wake up, you can't remember what happened. And what are you gonna do?
Mm.
You're gonna do the same thing again 3 days later? No, like understand yourself. Okay, cool. Then I need to personally keep barriers on myself because you just get uncontrollable. You just go crazy. No problem. Like again, it's learning. Where's the balance? I'm gonna have to centralize myself a little bit more. I need to be able to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I can't go
Mhm.
all in on one thing because I think again we lose ourselves. But I do think balance is a series of imbalanced times that when you zoom out, you actually find balance because you learn
I like
in those times, right? You learn when you're a little bit nuts and you do the right things and then the wrong things, and you go to the extremes and you bounce around. And hopefully,
mhm.
fingers crossed, you've not been an ignorant bastard and you've actually learned who you are, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like now I can be a little bit more homeostatic and a half decent human being. But dude, I got a question.
Yeah.
What's the 3 words you'd tell your younger self?
3 words I tell my younger self. Oh my God, it can only be 3 words. Not that serious.
Mm.
What we were just kind of talking about. I'm trying to think of like a more, I don't know. See, I'm trying to make it into a competition. I'm like, it needs to be more perfect than that.
you know,
Like I'm sitting here saying not that serious as I'm taking your question very seriously when I'm pretty
yeah,
sure
yeah.
it's That's serious.
Yeah,
So apparently
yeah.
I still need the advice.
It's one that we tell ourselves every day, right? Imperfection is where the beauty lies, mate. Trust me. You don't
Mhm.
need like these polished edges and everything needs to be absolutely tip top, because the top or the top 5% will probably take you 95% of the time. Do
Yeah.
95%, make it good, move on.
Yeah. I know that's something I tell people all the time. Good enough. And that was
Yes,
really
good.
hard for me. So good enough.
Right.
So,
Thank you so much for your time. This has been an honor and a privilege.
of course. Thank you.
Right. You go have a good day. It's Sunday, right?
Sunday.
Enjoy your
Yep.
Sunday. Enjoy your Super
Sunday
Bowl.
here.
I
Yes,
hope the
thank you.
team wins. I have no idea who plays, but I hope the Wings are good too.
Me neither. It's the Usher concert where football will be played.
100%. And the food, right?
Yes, of course. Well, good
Legend.
to meet you.
You too, pal. We'll speak soon.
Bye.
See you later. Bye, everybody.